Andre Whitfield was 44 years old, and until that Tuesday morning, he thought he knew exactly who his wife was. He had spent 15 years building a civil engineering empire from the ground up, a company now worth $500 million, anchored by the largest federal contract of his career. Patricia had been beside him for 12 of those years. He had never questioned her loyalty. Then, standing in his own kitchen at 5:30 in the morning, her phone lit up on the counter with a text he was never supposed to see. 8 months of planning, a coordinated legal strategy, a celebration she was already having, champagne, friends, a laptop with $500 million circled in red marker, because she believed the divorce was already won, and the money was already hers. She laughed that he never saw it coming. She toasted to her future in the kitchen he built. What Patricia never knew, what nobody had whispered to her in 12 years of marriage, was that $500 million had never been in Andre's name at all. It belonged to one woman Patricia had spent years overlooking, and that woman was his mother. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The kitchen light was on before the son had any say in the matter. Andre Whitfield stood at the counter in a white t-shirt and gray sweatpants, a mug of black coffee cooling beside his right hand, a legal pad open in front of him. The house was quiet in the particular way that expensive houses are quiet. No noise from the street, no creak in the walls, nothing but the low hum of the refrigerator and the sound of his own pen moving across paper. 5:32 a.m., Tuesday. He had been up since 5. The legal pad was covered in his handwriting. Neat, dense, precise. Column notes from the Phase 2 structural reports his project managers had submitted Friday afternoon. Load calculations for the Roanoke site. A question he had circled twice about drainage grading on the northern approach. He moved through the pages the way he moved through everything, without rushing, without skipping, giving each line exactly what it required. On the wall above the kitchen doorway hung a framed photograph, 8 inches by 10, a groundbreaking ceremony 9 years back. Andre, in a hard hat and a dark suit, holding a shovel at an angle, not smiling for the camera the way people perform smiling for cameras, but actually smiling, a private thing that had leaked out because he couldn't help it. Standing next to him, Ruth Whitfield, 71 now, 62 then, small, upright, one hand resting on her son's arm. She was not looking at the camera either. She was looking at him. The photograph had hung in 3 different offices before it found this wall. It went wherever he went. That was not something he had ever said out loud. The house itself was beautiful. 4,000 square feet of clean lines and careful choices. Wide plank oak floors, high ceilings, windows that ran floor to ceiling in the back and let the yard in like a painting. Patricia had designed most of it, and she had good taste. Real taste, not purchased taste, which was a distinction Andre respected. The house showed care. Every room showed care. What it did not show, and what care could not fix, was the particular silence that had settled between 2 people who still shared a space, but had quietly stopped sharing the same direction. It was not loud, the distance. It did not announce itself. It lived in the slight pause before she answered a question, in the way she moved around him in the kitchen without touching him, in the dinner conversations that were full of words and short on weight. He had noticed it for 2 years. He had not found the right door into the conversation. He told himself he would. When the Roanoke project cleared its first inspection, when the federal contract moved into Phase 2, when the next thing after the next thing was finished, he was always building the bridge he would use to get there. He had not gotten there yet. He turned a page on the legal pad, found his note about the drainage grading, picked up his pen. That was when the phone lit up. Patricia's phone was charging on the far end of the counter, face up. He was not looking at it. He did not need to be looking at it. The screen lit white, then settled into the preview banner. He could read it from where he stood. From a contact saved only as D. Attorney confirmed. File by end of month. You'll have the whole $500 by Christmas. Andre looked at it. He counted, without meaning to count, the seconds he stood there. 11. He knew it was 11 because he heard the refrigerator cycle through a hum and go quiet in the middle of it. He did not touch the phone. He did not move toward the stairs. He stood exactly where he was, in the kitchen of the house that his work had built, and he looked at those 2 lines of text until the screen went dark again. Then he turned back to his legal pad. He moved to a clean page. He wrote 1 line across the top, tore the page loose, folded it once, and put it in the pocket of his sweatpants. He picked up his coffee. It had gone lukewarm. He drank it anyway. Then he turned back to the drainage notes and kept reading. He had married her on a Saturday in June, 12 years ago, in a small church in Silver Spring with too many flowers and not enough air conditioning. Patricia in white, laughing at something her sister Renelle had said just before they started down the aisle. A full laugh, unguarded and real, the kind that had first made him look at her twice. He had stood at the front of that church and felt, with complete certainty, that he was doing the right thing. In the front pew, Ruth Whitfield sat with her hands folded in her lap and watched her new daughter-in-law come down the aisle. Her expression was not cold. It was not unwelcoming. It was something harder to name than either of those things. The look of a woman who sees very clearly, who has decided there is nothing to do with that clarity right now, and who is content, for the moment, to simply wait and see. He woke at 5 the next morning. Same time, same white t-shirt, same gray sweatpants. He went downstairs, started the coffee, and opened his legal pad to a fresh page. Patricia's phone was no longer on the counter. She must have taken it upstairs at some point in the night. He did not think about that for long. By 5:45, he heard her moving around upstairs, the creak of the bathroom door, the sound of water running. By 6:20, she came into the kitchen in a silk robe, her hair pinned up, and poured herself a cup from the pot he had made. She glanced at his legal pad the way she always glanced at it, like it was part of the furniture. "You eat anything?" she asked. "Not yet." She pulled open the refrigerator and stood in its light for a moment. "There's that fruit salad from Sunday. I'll get something at the office." She closed the refrigerator. She looked at him. Nothing in her face said anything was different. Nothing in his face said anything either. "Big day?" she asked. It was the question she asked most mornings. Filler, not interest, but filler that sounded like interest, which was something Patricia had always been good at. "Phase 2, review call at 8, he said. "Should run long." She nodded. She carried her coffee toward the hallway. He watched her go without watching her go. A thing he had learned to do years ago on job sites, reading a room without letting the room know it was being read. At the door she paused. "Don't forget we have the Hendersons Saturday." "I won't forget." She disappeared up the stairs. He sat in the quiet kitchen for another 45 minutes, reading his reports and drinking his coffee. When he left the house at 7:10, he stopped in the hallway, the way he always did, and called up to her. "I'm heading out." Her voice came down from behind the bedroom door. "Okay. Have a good day." "You too," he said. He closed the front door behind him, walked to his truck, got in, pulled out of the driveway. 3 blocks from the house, he pulled over and sat for a moment with the engine running. Then he picked up his phone and called Diane Foster. Her office was in DuPont Circle, on the 4th floor of a building that looked unremarkable from the street, and was anything but. Andre had been coming here for 11 years. He knew the receptionist by name. He knew which chair in the conference room had a loose armrest and always chose it anyway, because the view from that seat faced the window. Diane met him in the conference room at 9. She had a legal portfolio open before she sat down, which meant she had already pulled the documents he had told her to pull. She was 39, precise in every movement, with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses she only wore when she thought no one important was watching. She looked at him the way she always looked at him, like she was reading the load-bearing elements of whatever he brought into the room. "You said you had a hypothetical," she said. "If someone filed for divorce from me tomorrow," Andre said, "what would they actually be entitled to?" Diane looked at him for exactly as long as it took her to decide he was not asking academically. Then she opened her portfolio. "Exactly what you planned for them to be entitled to," she said. "Not $1 more." She walked him through it. The holding structure, the documentation, the ownership record, 11 years of quiet, maintained, perfectly legal architecture. She spoke the way she always spoke. No decoration, no softening, just the material facts laid out in the order they mattered. Andre listened to every word. When she finished, he sat with it for a moment. Outside the window, the city was going about its morning, traffic moving, people walking, the ordinary machinery of a Wednesday running as scheduled. "How quickly can you be ready to respond?" he asked. "I've been ready," Diane said, "since the day we filed these." He nodded once. He stood. He picked up his copy of the documents. "Then we wait," he said. He did not wait long. 11 days. He had known it was coming, and still there was something clarifying about the moment it actually arrived. The process server appearing in the doorway of his office on a Thursday afternoon, while his project coordinator Marcus was sitting across the desk from him reviewing site photographs. The envelope held out. The professional neutrality of the man's face. Andre thanked him. He told Marcus they'd pick up after lunch. He closed the door and sat back down at his desk and read every page of the filing from the first line to the last, the same way he read every document that crossed this desk, without rushing, without skipping. When he finished, he set the papers on the desk in a neat stack. He looked out the window for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Leon. He came home at 6:30 and heard them before he reached the kitchen. Laughter. More than one voice. Music low in the background. Something upbeat that Patricia liked, and Andre never remembered the name of. The particular warmth of a room full of people who believe they are celebrating something. He stopped in the hallway. Through the open kitchen doorway, he could see the island. Champagne flutes. A spread of food. Good food. The kind she ordered from the place on Wisconsin Avenue when she wanted a thing to feel like an occasion. And a laptop, open, angled toward the room. He looked at the laptop. The screen showed a financial summary. Clean columns. Company figures he recognized. He could see the federal contract number. He could see the subsidiary breakdown. And across the top of the page, in red marker, circled twice, $500. Patricia was standing with her back mostly to the doorway, talking to her sister Renelle. Two other women Andre recognized from Patricia's social circle were at the counter, glasses raised. Nobody had seen him come in. "Attorney says the asset division alone is enough to set me up permanently," Patricia was saying. Like, permanently, permanently. And David put together the whole financial breakdown. It's completely airtight. She laughed. Short, bright, relieved. Andre never saw a single piece of this coming. Not one. Renelle said something Andre couldn't make out. Patricia laughed again. Fuller this time. The same laugh from the church in Silver Spring. Unguarded and real. He stood in the doorway of his own home and let it land. Then one of the women at the counter looked up and her face changed. And the change traveled around the room the way these things do. One face, then another, then Renelle, and then Patricia, turning to see what everyone was looking at. She found him in the doorway. Her expression did not collapse. Patricia was too composed for collapse, but something moved behind her eyes. A quick, involuntary recalculation. Andre looked at the laptop. He looked at the circled number. He looked at his wife. He said, with complete and unnerving evenness, "Congratulations, Patricia." Not loud, not hard, just steady. The voice of a man who had already finished doing what the moment required of him before the moment arrived. He turned and walked up the stairs. He moved through the bedroom without hurrying. He pulled his weekender bag from the closet shelf and packed 4 days of clothes. Suits in a garment bag, a toiletry kit, his charger, his backup legal pad. He moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who has thought through the next several steps and is simply executing them now. He came back downstairs 8 minutes later. The kitchen had gone quiet. He could feel them in there, not speaking, listening to his footsteps cross the hallway floor. He walked to the front door and picked up his keys. He did not go into the kitchen. He did not say anything else. He opened the door and left. Patricia stood in the kitchen with her glass in her hand and listened to his truck back out of the driveway. She looked at Rennell. Rennell looked back at her, a question forming. Patricia let out a slow breath. She picked up the champagne bottle. "He's just—" She paused, chose her words the way she always chose her words. "He doesn't know what he's walking into yet. That's just how he gets when he's overwhelmed." She refilled her glass. She looked at the laptop, at the number she had written. "He'll see." She raised her glass. Rennell raised hers. The music kept playing. Leon's house was a brick row home in Hyattsville, 22 minutes from Bethesda without traffic. The guest room smelled like fresh paint and old wood, and the mattress was too soft, and Andre slept 4 hours without moving. He was up at 5:15. He sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a moment. Then he picked up his phone and called Diane. She answered on the second ring. He did not ask if it was too early. She did not mention it. "File the response today," he said, "and I want the disclosure delivered in person, at the house. Patricia and her attorney both present." "I can arrange that," Diane said. "Give me 4 days to get the documents in order and confirm the meeting." 4 days is fine. Andre. A pause. Brief, professional. "You understand that once we file, the clock starts moving." "Good," he said. He heard her writing something down. Then, "I'll call you when it's set." He hung up and sat for another minute in the quiet room. Outside, a garbage truck rumbled somewhere down the block. A bird started up in the tree outside the window, and then stopped. He picked up his legal pad from the nightstand and looked at the single line he had written in his kitchen 4 days ago. He read it once. Then he flipped to a fresh page and started his morning notes. By the time Leon came down at 6:45 in a Whitfield Infrastructure t-shirt and no shoes, Andre was at the kitchen table with his laptop open and a cup of coffee he had made himself from the machine Leon kept on the counter. Leon stopped in the doorway. He looked at his brother, the posture, the open laptop, the legal pad with its careful notes, and said nothing for a moment. He had seen this version of Andre before. Not often. Maybe 3 times in his life. It was the version that showed up after his brother had already absorbed the worst of something and was quietly on the other side of it, not because the damage wasn't real, but because Andre had already decided what he was doing about it. It was the version that meant something was already in motion. Leon went to the cabinet, got a mug, and poured himself coffee. He sat down across from Andre. "You sleep?" he asked. "Some," Andre said, without looking up. Leon nodded. He drank his coffee. He did not ask what the plan was. He did not ask how Andre was doing. He understood, in the way that older brothers sometimes understand, that the best thing he could do right now was be in the room. They sat like that for a while. The morning came in through the kitchen window, slow and gray. 4 days later, Andre pulled up to the Bethesda house at 9:52 in the morning. He was wearing his charcoal suit, the one he wore to contract negotiations and the one he had worn the day he signed the federal deal. He had pressed it himself at Leon's, in the small laundry room off the hallway, because the details mattered. Diane's car was already at the curb. She was standing beside it in a dark blazer with her portfolio under one arm, looking at her phone. She glanced up as he approached. "They're inside," she said. "Brant got here 15 minutes ago. He brought a junior associate." "Let him keep the associate," Andre said. They walked to the front door together. Howard Brant was a tall man with silver hair and the practiced ease of someone who had won a lot of rooms by walking into them. He was sitting at the kitchen table in a charcoal blazer of his own, a leather folio open in front of him, one arm resting on the table with the relaxed confidence of a man who believed the math was already settled. Patricia sat to his right. She wore a deep blue dress and had her hair back. She looked composed. She had spent 4 days in the warm certainty that the hard part was over. Andre sat down across from them. Diane took the chair beside him and placed her portfolio on the table and opened it. "Thank you both for making time," Diane said. She did not extend it further than that. She turned to the first document. "In response to the petitioner's asset claims, we are providing documentation of the actual ownership structure of the assets in question." Brant nodded, his pen ready. "Whitfield Infrastructure Group," Diane said, "is not owned by Andre Whitfield." Brant's pen paused. "The company is owned by a holding company. That holding company is RMW Capital Partners, LLC. She slid the incorporation documents across the table. Formation date, 11 years ago. Sole registered owner. She waited one beat. Precise. Intentional. Ruth May Whitfield. Howard Brant picked up the documents. He read the first page. He read it again. The silver-haired confidence did not leave his face all at once. It drained, the way water drains, steadily and without drama, until what was left was the expression of a man who had just understood that 8 months of work were built on a foundation that did not exist. Patricia was watching him. She did not yet know what the documents said, but she could read a face, and Howard Brant's face said everything before his mouth could form a word. Her eyes moved to Andre. Andre was already looking at her. Diane continued. She did not slow down, and she did not soften it. She outlined the settlement under the actual ownership structure. Andre's personal liquid accounts, his vehicle. The Bethesda house, which she noted for the record, carried a $1.4 million mortgage against a property in a softening market. That was it. No company assets, no subsidiary interests, no federal contract value, no share in what 12 years of 6 a.m. mornings had built. Not $1 of the number Patricia had written in red marker and circled twice. Ruth May Whitfield was alive, fully competent, and had provided a notarized statement confirming she had no intention of dissolving or transferring any asset under her ownership in connection with any divorce proceeding, now or at any future date. The kitchen was absolutely silent. Howard Brant set the documents down. He looked at his associate. The associate looked at the table. Patricia's voice, when it came, was barely a sound. "How?" She stopped. She started again. "When did—" She stopped again. Her eyes moved to the documents, then back to Andre. She started to ask why no one had ever told her, and caught the question before it fully formed. Because the answer was already there, and saying it out loud would only mean admitting she had never had what she thought she had. Andre looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood. He buttoned his jacket. 1 button, 2. He picked up his copy of the documents and held them at his side. He looked at Howard Brant. "Thank you for your time." Measured. Final. Then he looked at Patricia. He held it. Long enough for it to mean something. Long enough for the full weight of the room to settle into the space between them. He said, "My mother says hello." He walked out of his own kitchen for the last time. Leon was at the curb. Andre came down the front steps and got into the passenger seat and pulled the door shut. Through the windshield, the street looked like any other morning in the neighborhood. Kids heading to school somewhere behind them. A landscaping truck 2 houses down. Leon looked at him. Andre stared through the glass for a moment. Something at the corner of his mouth moved. Not quite a smile, but the closest thing to one he had managed in 3 weeks. "Drive," he said. Leon drove 3 blocks before he said anything. "Talk to me," he said. Andre kept his eyes on the window. A woman walked a dog along the sidewalk. A kid on a bike cut across a driveway. The neighborhood moved past like it had no idea what had just happened inside one of its houses. "Give me a minute," Andre said. Leon gave him a minute, then 2. At the red light on Wisconsin, he said, "All of it, from the beginning." Andre exhaled through his nose, slow. He watched the light. Then he started talking. He told it the way he did everything. In order, without decoration. The kitchen at 5:30 in the morning. The phone on the counter. The screen lighting up. The contact saved only as D. He said the text out loud for the first time and felt the words land differently in the air of his brother's car than they had in his chest for the last 3 weeks. Leon said nothing. His jaw tightened once. He kept driving. Andre told him about Diane, the meeting, her voice when she said not $1 more. He told him about coming home that night and standing in the doorway and watching Patricia raise a glass and laugh that he never saw any of it coming. He told him about the laptop, the red marker. The numbers circled twice. Leon's hands shifted on the wheel. "And she filed at your office," Leon said. It was not a question. "Front desk," Andre said. 10:15 in the morning. Leon nodded slowly, the way a man nods when he is deciding not to say the thing that is forming in his mouth. Andre told him about today. The charcoal suit. Diane sliding the documents across the table. Howard Brandt reading them twice. Patricia watching Brandt's face change and understanding before anyone said a word. He told him his mother's name in that room had done more than anything else could have. The car was quiet for a moment. "How long?" Leon asked. "How long has Mama held it?" 11 years. Leon looked at him, just a quick glance, then back to the road. "She never said a word." "No, not to me either." "I know." Leon let that sit. Andre told him the rest of it, the part he had not said out loud to anyone yet. 11 years ago, when the company was scaling and a competitor had filed the first real litigation threat against Whitfield Infrastructure, Diane had come to him with a recommendation: place the holding company's ownership in a name entirely outside his own. Someone trusted. Someone with no visible connection to the business. Andre had not deliberated. He had thought of one person. They drove to Baltimore on a Sunday after church. Ruth made coffee. They sat at her kitchen table, the same table where she used to help him with homework, and she read every document Diane had prepared. She asked 2 questions. She signed where she was told to sign. When it was done, she poured him more coffee and asked if he was staying for dinner. She had not mentioned it to Patricia. Not once. Not in 11 years. There had been no decision to hide it. Patricia had simply never asked. In 12 years of marriage, she had learned the square footage of the house, the name of their accountant, the make of Andre's car, and the number on the company's last valuation. She had never once asked how it was structured, only what it produced. The distinction mattered to Andre. He had spent 3 weeks turning it over. It still mattered. "There's more," he said. Leon glanced at him again. 3 years ago. Refinancing. David was in the room when a document came through that referenced RMW Capital Partners. Andre paused. "He asked me about it directly. What did you tell him?" "I told him it was a legacy administrative structure, tax efficiency holdover from the early days." He looked out the window. "I redirected him and we moved on." But I don't think he moved on. I think he accepted what I said in the room and then spent time with it afterward." Andre's voice stayed even. "And I think he told Patricia." The car slowed for a stop sign. Leon stopped longer than necessary. His hand came off the wheel and pressed flat on his thigh. "David," he said quietly. "I don't have it confirmed yet," Andre said. "I have the shape of it." Leon pulled through the intersection. "I know someone in his building," he said. "One of the guys who manages the parking. We go back a long way." He looked straight ahead. "I'll start there." He pulled up to the hotel 11 minutes later. Andre opened the door and got out, then stood with one hand on the frame for a moment. Leon looked up at him. "Don't do anything yet." Andre looked back at his brother. "I'm not." He went inside. The room was on the 7th floor. Plain. Quiet. A window that looked out over a parking structure and a strip of gray sky. Andre set his bag on the chair, took off his jacket and hung it, and sat on the edge of the bed. He reached into his bag and pulled out his legal pad. He turned to the first page, to the single line he had written at 5:30 in the morning, 4 days ago, standing at his kitchen counter with Patricia sleeping upstairs and his coffee going cold. He read it once, then he clicked his pen, moved to the line beneath it, and began to write. Leon did not make it obvious. That was the thing about Leon. People who did not know him well assumed he operated on impulse because he was direct, because he did not soften things. But directness was not the same as carelessness. He knew how to ask a question that sounded like nothing. He spent the first day just making calls, regular calls, checking in with guys he had worked alongside on various Whitfield jobs over the years, a project manager in Silver Spring, a concrete supplier out of Rockville, a site foreman he had known since the early days who now ran his own small crew. Leon talked about work, complained about material costs, asked about families. At the end of each conversation, almost as an afterthought, he'd mention David's building, said he had a meeting up there next week and didn't know the parking situation. That was all it took. Most times, people liked to be helpful, especially to Leon, who had never once asked for something without having earned the right to ask. By the second day, he had a name. Marcus Webb. Managed parking and building logistics for the office tower on K Street, where David kept his executive suite. Leon had crossed paths with Marcus maybe 4 years back on a commercial build in Northeast. A brief overlap, a few shared lunches, the kind of acquaintance that doesn't require maintenance, but survives time anyway. He called Marcus on a Wednesday afternoon from the parking lot of a hardware store. They talked for 12 minutes. Toward the end, Leon said he was asking because he might be referring someone David's way for a business meeting and wanted to make sure the logistics were straightforward. Marcus said, "Sure, yeah, the parking was easy." Then he said something else. Said it the way people say things they don't know are important, the easy offhand way of a man filling conversational space. He said he used to see David having lunch with a woman in the lobby cafe. Real regular. Like twice a month for a stretch. Maybe 2 years back. Maybe a little more. Sharp-looking woman. They always looked like they were talking business. Always had papers out. Leon asked, casual as he could make it, what she looked like. Marcus described Patricia Whitfield. Leon drove to Andre's hotel that same evening. He sat in the chair by the window, turned it around, and told him. Andre listened without moving. When Leon finished, the room was quiet enough that the sound of traffic from 7 floors down was audible. A low, steady hum, like something running in the walls. "Twice a month," Andre said. That's what Marcus said. For a stretch. His words. 2 years ago. More than 2 years, the way he put it. Could be closer to 2.5. Andre was quiet again. He was looking at the legal pad on the bed beside him, but he wasn't reading it. He was working something out. Leon could see it the same way you could see load-bearing calculation happening behind a structural engineer's eyes. Nothing visible on the surface. Everything moving underneath. The divorce filing was 4 weeks ago. 2.5 years ago, the company had not experienced any visible crisis. His marriage had been strained but functional. There had been no confrontation, no separation, no event that explained a pivot toward lawyers and plans. 2.5 years ago was simply a Tuesday, an ordinary Tuesday, on which his wife was apparently sitting across from his business partner in a lobby cafe with papers between them. This wasn't her idea. Andre said. No, Leon said. It wasn't. David had not stumbled into Patricia's orbit. He had found her there, or brought her there, at a point in time when the marriage was tired but not broken, at a point when David would have needed someone on the inside, someone with legal standing, someone whose name could sign a filing. Patricia had not become a co-conspirator. She had been recruited as one. Andre called Diane that night. He stood at the window while the phone rang, looking out at the parking structure and the thin strip of sky above it. Diane picked up on the second ring. He told her what Leon had found. Then he told her he wanted full discovery proceedings initiated. He wanted communication records subpoenaed from Howard Brandt's firm. Every document that had passed between Brandt's office and David Ossie's, every email, every filing. Diane said, "I'll have the paperwork moving by morning." He said, "Good." He hung up and turned from the window. While the discovery proceedings moved through their first steps, Leon was already pulling on the next thread. He had been thinking about Renelle, Patricia's sister, who had been in the kitchen the night of the champagne, who had laughed alongside Patricia and raised a glass to a 500 meters settlement. Renelle's husband was a man named Curtis, who did facilities work and had, over the years, exchanged enough job site nods with Leon to constitute a relationship, not a friendship, but enough. Leon called Curtis on a Thursday morning and kept it short. He said he needed to know something and that Curtis deserved to know a few things in return, and that this conversation was between the two of them. Curtis was quiet on the line for a moment. Then he said, "What do you need to know?" What Leon learned from Curtis came back to Andre piece by piece, part of it over the phone, part of it over a late dinner at a diner 2 miles from the hotel, where they sat in a corner booth with the kind of quiet that said the conversation was private. Renelle had let something slip to Curtis 6 months ago. She had not meant to. She had been processing it herself, the weight of what Patricia had told her. And she had said more to her husband than she intended. Curtis had not fully understood it at the time. He understood it now. Patricia had told Renelle about some kind of ownership complication with Andre's company. Those were the words Renelle had used to Curtis. Ownership complication. Patricia had apparently been anxious about it, had described it as something she needed to investigate and resolve before any legal action would hold up. She had said there was a holding structure, a company above the company, and that the name on it might be a problem. That information had come from David. David had told Patricia about RMW Capital Partners, not the full picture, because he had never gotten the full picture. But he had told her what he knew, that there was a holding structure, that there was an outside owner, and that before they moved, they needed to find out whether that owner was a complication or a speed bump. His exact framing, according to Renelle, relayed through Curtis, who had heard it filtered through his wife's retelling of a half-remembered conversation. Is the old woman a problem or not? Andre went still when Leon said that. Leon watched him. Andre was thinking about a phone call, a specific phone call that his mother had mentioned to him briefly, months ago, called it a check-in from Patricia, said it was fine, said Patricia had asked a lot of questions about her health and her plans, asked if she had updated her paperwork recently. Ruth had mentioned it in the way she mentioned small things, briefly, without emphasis, the way you say the mail came. Andre had noted it and moved on. He was not moving on now. Patricia had called Ruth, had been warm, had been unhurried, had asked about her health, her estate plans, whether things were in order, had spent 45 minutes asking exactly the right questions in the softest possible way, trying to determine whether a 71-year-old retired schoolteacher in Baltimore was durable enough to be a legal complication or fragile enough to be managed. And Ruth had answered every question, warmly, completely, and had given her nothing, not one useful thing, not one word that would help. 45 minutes of gracious, unhurried answers that told Patricia exactly what Ruth wanted her to know, and nothing else. When the call ended, Ruth had sat in her kitchen in Baltimore, alone, and understood precisely what had just happened. And she had not called Andre, had not warned him, had not said a word. She had waited. Andre reached for his phone. He found his mother's name and pressed call. She picked up on the second ring. "I need to come see you," he said. Her voice was calm, unhurried, the same voice it had always been. "I know," she said. "Come Sunday." The drive to Baltimore took 40 minutes. Andre made it in silence. No music, no phone calls, just the highway unrolling ahead of him, gray and straight under a sky the color of old concrete. He had the heat on low. His coffee from the hotel sat in the cup holder and went cold somewhere around the Beltway. He had not been to his mother's house since before the filing. He turned onto her street just before 10 in the morning. The neighborhood was quiet, the way Sunday mornings in Baltimore are quiet. A few cars moving slowly, someone walking a dog, a man sweeping his front steps with the deliberate pace of a person who had nowhere urgent to be. Andre pulled up in front of the small brick house and put the car in park and sat for a moment. The house was the same as it had always been. Same iron railing on the front steps. Same window box, empty now in the cold. Same door, painted dark red. A color Ruth had chosen the year Andre turned 15 and had never changed because she saw no reason to change what worked. He sat there for maybe 30 seconds. Then he got out. She had coffee ready. Of course she did. Ruth Whitfield moved through her kitchen the way she moved through everything, without hurry, without wasted motion, with the quiet efficiency of a woman who had been making this kitchen work for 40 years and had no interest in performing the act of it. She set his mug on the table before he had fully taken off his coat. She sat across from him. She folded her hands around her own cup. She looked at him. "Whenever you're ready," she said. He told her everything. He started at the beginning. The kitchen counter at 5:30 in the morning, the phone screen lighting up. The 11 seconds he stood there reading a text he was never supposed to see. He told her about Diane, about the response meeting, about the documents sliding across the table and the way Howard Brandt's face had gone quiet and still, like a man watching something expensive fall and knowing he could not catch it. He told her about Leon and Marcus, and what Marcus had said about the lobby cafe, about Curtis, and what Renelle had told her husband without meaning to, about the phrase, "Is the old woman a problem or not?" and how he had gone still when Leon said it. Ruth listened. She did not interrupt, did not nod in places where people nod to show they are following. She just listened, the way she had listened to him his entire life, completely, without editing, the way you listen when you already understand that the person speaking needs to hear themselves say it out loud before the weight of it will move. When he finished, the kitchen was quiet. Ruth looked at her coffee. She was still for a long moment, long enough that the refrigerator clicked on and hummed in the silence. Then she said, "I knew something was wrong the day she called." She described it carefully. The call had come on a Wednesday afternoon in the early fall, she said. Patricia had been warm from the first word. Warm in the way that a person is warm when they have decided in advance to be warm, which is a different thing from warmth, and Ruth had been around long enough to know the difference. She had asked about Ruth's health, about her plans, about whether she had been to the doctor recently, whether she was staying active, whether she had people around her. All the right questions, all asked in the right order. Then the questions had shifted. Subtle. Ruth gave a small nod when she said the word, as though acknowledging the technique. The questions had moved, carefully, and without appearing to move, toward Ruth's paperwork. Whether she had updated her documents recently, whether she had a good attorney, whether her affairs were in order. Patricia had laughed softly at that phrase. Ruth said, "Your affairs," and called it a funny way to put it, and then circled back to the same ground 2 more times in the next 15 minutes in ways that sounded like different questions, but were not. She wanted to know if I was solid, Ruth said, or whether I was the kind of woman who had signed something years ago and didn't really know what she'd signed. Ruth picked up her coffee, set it down without drinking. I gave her 45 minutes, she said. I answered everything she asked, and I gave her nothing she could use. A pause. When she said goodbye, she sounded satisfied. I don't think she knew how much of that I had arranged for her. Andre looked at his mother. Why didn't you call me? Ruth met his eyes. Because you didn't need me to, she said. You needed to find it yourself, so it would be fully yours when the time came. She tilted her head slightly. I built you to find it, baby. I wasn't worried. The kitchen was quiet again. After a moment, Ruth said, What do you want to happen? Andre told her. He laid it out the same way he laid out a project, sequentially, without decoration, one load-bearing element at a time. He told her what he needed from her, specifically and clearly. He told her the timeline. He told her the scope. Ruth listened to all of it. When he finished, she was quiet for exactly 1 moment. Then she nodded. Once. The same nod she had given him when he was 12 years old and had worked something out for himself. The nod that meant, yes, that's right. You got there. I'll make 1 phone call, she said. He started to ask who. She looked at him. He stopped. At the door, he hugged her. She held on a moment longer than usual, her hand on his back, steady and still. Then she stepped back and looked up at him, the way she had looked at him his whole life, clear-eyed and without any need to say what was in her face, like she had built him, board by board, and knew exactly what he could hold. Drive safe, she said. He walked to the car, 40 minutes back up the highway. The sky had not changed. His coffee in the cup holder was long cold, and he did not touch it. He was still 2 blocks from the hotel when his phone lit up on the passenger seat. Diane. A voicemail. Left 40 minutes ago. He pulled into the parking lot, stopped the car, and played it. Diane's voice was measured. It was always measured. But there was something underneath the evenness of it. Not alarm, the particular flatness of a person who has read something and is working to stay clinical about it. Andre. Discovery documents came in this afternoon. Communication records from Brant's firm and David's business accounts. I've been through the first third of them. A pause. It's worse than we expected. Call me when you're back. He sat in the parked car. He looked straight ahead. Then he picked up the phone and called Diane back. He called Diane from the parking lot, and she picked up on the first ring. I'm back, he said. Come in tomorrow morning, she said. Early. I need you to see this in person. Her office was on the 14th floor of a glass building in downtown Bethesda, and at 7 in the morning it was quiet, except for the low sound of the ventilation system and the soft knock of Diane's keyboard when she was finishing a thought. Andre had been coming to this office for 11 years. He knew the way it smelled, clean paper and coffee and something faintly chemical from the carpet. And he knew the way Diane worked, which was the way a surgeon works. Everything in its place, no motion wasted, no gesture made without a reason. She had been in before 6. He could tell by the documents. They covered the long conference table in organized stacks, each one held together with a binder clip and a handwritten label along the top edge. She had put them in sequence from left to right, the way you lay out a timeline when you want someone to be able to walk the length of it and understand, step by step, what happened and when. At the far left end of the table, a single yellow sticky note read, 18 months ago. At the far right end, another, filing date. Diane handed him coffee without asking. She stood at the left end of the table. I'm going to walk you through it, she said. I'm not going to tell you what to think. Just what's there. Andre nodded. She began. It had started with the financial assessments. David had prepared 3 of them, Diane explained, each one building on the last, each one submitted to Howard Brant's office under the framing of independent company valuation for purposes of marital asset division. She laid them out in order and let Andre read the key sections himself. He read them. He read them slowly, the way he read structural reports, looking not just at what was written but at what the language was doing, what loads it was trying to hide. The federal contract portfolio, which represented the core of Whitfield Infrastructure's current and future value, had been described in all three documents as speculative and contingent on continued favorable regulatory conditions. The renewal provisions, which Andre had personally negotiated over 14 months and which carried protections so specific they were nearly unprecedented in federal contracting work, were not mentioned at all. The company's bonding capacity, which had expanded significantly after the initial contract award and which was one of the primary reasons the second phase extension was already in discussion, had been listed at 30% below its actual certified level. The subsidiary holdings had been categorized as ancillary and non-revenue generating. Several of them were currently generating revenue. On paper, Whitfield Infrastructure Group did not look like a 500 Naliters company. It looked like a firm with shaky prospects and a government relationship that might not hold. "This is deliberate," Andre said. "Every word," Diane said. She moved to the next stack. The plan, she explained, was structured in two parts. Patricia's settlement would come from Andre's personal accounts. Real money. Visible money. Enough to look like a real divorce outcome. Enough that no judge would look too hard at the company valuation if the personal settlement appeared fair. Then, once the divorce was finalized and Andre's share of a declining company was officially separated from Patricia's claim, David's contact, a private equity investor named Warren Spill, would step in and purchase Andre's share at the price the fraudulent assessments had manufactured. Diane slid a document across the table. "That's the shell entity." Andre looked at it. A single-page incorporation record, filed in Delaware 7 months before the divorce. The name was Anodyne, the kind of name that was designed to be forgotten. 3 initials and the word Holdings. The registered agent was a firm with no other public profile, but the financial records subpoenaed from Brandt's firm connected it cleanly. Patricia held a quiet stake. After the acquisition closed, David would run the company. Patricia would collect passively from the background. They had planned to take everything he built and give it back to each other. Andre set the document down. He did not say anything for a moment. Diane let the silence hold. Then she moved to the final stack. 3 dinners, 3 separate subcontractors, each contacted individually, each meeting framed as routine relationship management. David had been careful about that. Different restaurants, different weeks, spread far enough apart that no pattern was visible unless you were looking for one. 2 of the contractors, when David had asked, carefully, over dessert, the way you ask a question you need to sound casual, whether they would be comfortable working under new leadership, had declined. One had agreed. His name was Briggs. 7 years with Whitfield Infrastructure. Reliable work. Clean sites. A man Andre had trusted enough to bring onto 2 federal project phases. Diane placed a single printed page in front of Andre. A summary of Briggs's account, compiled from the communication records. Andre read it. Midway down the page, in a block of reconstructed text from a recovered message thread, David had referred to the federal contract as our contract. The date on the message was 6 months before Patricia filed. 6 months before any divorce existed on paper, David Ossie was already talking about the federal contract like he owned it. Andre read it twice. Then he set it down on the table, flat and still, and looked at Diane. "Schedule the partners' meeting," he said. "Full board, David included, and call Warren Spill. Invite him as a prospective financial partner. Tell him we're offering transparency into the company's structure before any transaction moves forward." Diane had her pen in her hand before he finished the sentence. "When?" she said. "End of the week," Andre said. Andre arrived at 6:45. The building was quiet at that hour. The lobby security guard nodded. The elevator opened without waiting. The 14th floor hallway held nothing but the low hum of the overhead lights coming on one by one as the motion sensors caught him moving through. He had built this office the same way he built everything, slowly, correctly, with attention to what each room needed to do. He knew the weight of the door handle before he touched it. He knew the way his footsteps sounded on the wood floor of the conference room when it was empty. He went in and stood there for a moment. Then he got to work. He moved the chairs first. Not dramatically, a degree here, a few inches there, the kind of adjustments that no one would consciously notice, but that everyone would feel. He put himself at the head of the table. He put the chair at the far end a half-foot back from where it usually sat, angled very slightly toward the room, so that whoever occupied it would be seen by everyone present without having to say a single word. Then he set the packets down, 12 of them, printed, organized, held together with binder clips. He placed one at each seat, face down, with the precision of a man setting charges he intends to detonate in a specific order. He did not flip a single one over. Leon arrived at 7:30 in a dark jacket that did not quite fit the way it was supposed to, because Leon was a man built for work sites, and he wore formal clothes the way a person wears something borrowed. Functional, but slightly wrong. He walked into the conference room, looked at the setup, and looked at Andre. "You moved everything," Leon said. "Yes." Leon looked at the chair at the far end of the table. He understood without being told. "She here yet?" "She's coming with Diane," Andre said. 8 o'clock. Leon nodded and found his seat. The agenda listed him as Special Advisor, Field Operations. He looked at it once, said nothing about the title, and set it aside. Diane and Ruth arrived together at 8:05. Diane had her portfolio open before she cleared the doorway. Ruth walked in behind her in a gray dress, a small pearl pin at her collar, her white hair neat and close. She took in the room once, the table, the empty chairs, the face-down packets, and moved without hesitation to the far end, where she sat down, folded her hands, and said nothing. She looked like a woman who had been waiting for this room her entire life. By 8:30, everyone else had filtered in. The CFO, Marcus Webb, settled into his usual seat and noticed immediately that the room felt different, though he could not have said exactly why. The two senior project managers came in together, talking quietly, and stopped talking when they saw Diane's expression. Warren Spill arrived at 8:32 in a well-cut gray suit, briefcase in hand, a man who believed he was attending a deal briefing and carried himself accordingly, relaxed, expectant, the particular ease of someone who thinks the meeting is going to confirm what they already know. David was last. He came in at 8:35, buttoning his jacket, already smiling the way he smiled when he entered rooms, broad and warm and practiced. He started to say something to Marcus, and then his eyes moved to the head of the table, where Andre sat, and then to Diane beside him, portfolio open, and then, with the slow, involuntary motion of a man who has already felt something shift, but cannot yet identify what, to the far end of the table. Ruth Whitfield sat with her hands folded and her eyes on him. David's smile did not disappear. It just stopped being connected to anything. He sat down. Andre waited until the room was completely still. Then he opened his copy of the packet and began. He spoke the way he spoke in every project review, methodically, without decoration, one element at a time. He did not editorialize. He did not raise his voice. He laid it out the way you lay out evidence of why a structure failed. Find the defect. Trace it back to its origin. Show the room exactly when the decision was made that compromised everything downstream. The financial assessments first. He walked through all three, explaining what each document had done. The deliberate undervaluation of the federal contract portfolio, the omitted renewal provisions, The bonding capacity listed 30% below its certified level. He named the documents. He named the dates. He named the firm that received them. He looked at Warren Spill when he said, "These assessments were prepared by a partner of this company and submitted to outside counsel as independent valuations. They were not independent. They were manufactured to support a purchase price that bore no relationship to this company's actual value. Any acquisition structured around these numbers would have been built on a foundation that does not exist." He slid a copy of the Shell Entity Incorporation record down the table to where Warren Spill sat. Warren Spill looked at it. He turned it over once. His jaw tightened by a degree. Andre continued. The Shell Entity, the quiet stake, Patricia's position in the structure after the acquisition closed. He named it all plainly, without venom, connecting each piece to the next, the way you connect load points on a diagram. Because the load tells you everything, if you are willing to follow it. Then the subcontractor dinners. He named the restaurants, the dates, the framing David had used to conduct them. He noted that 2 of the 3 contractors had declined when asked about working under new leadership, and that one had agreed. He said Briggs's name without hesitation. Warren Spill closed his portfolio. He stood, picked up his briefcase, and walked out of the conference room without speaking. The door closed behind him with a sound that was smaller than it felt. The room held its breath. David let the silence sit for exactly 3 seconds, and then he leaned forward. "I want to be clear about what I was doing," he said. His voice was steady, measured. The voice of a man who had prepared for this moment, but had prepared for a different version of it. "Andre, you were in the middle of a personal crisis. The company needed continuity planning. That is what a responsible partner does. He looks at the landscape, he has conversations, he makes sure the relationships are stable. That's all those dinners were. And the valuation documents, those were preliminary, internal, not final assessments. I was building contingency options, not a scheme." He sat back. "I have given 20 years to this company. The same 20 years you have. And if my methods were imperfect, that is a conversation we should have had privately, not—" He gestured at the room, the packets, the face-down pages still unturned at every seat. "Not like this." His hands were still. His voice was still. But his eyes moved just once to Ruth at the far end of the table, and then away. Andre let him finish. He let the last word land and settle and sit in the room for long enough that everyone present understood it had been heard and considered and weighed. Then he reached into his folder and placed one final document on the table. He did not slide it dramatically. He simply set it down in front of David, flat and square, the way you place a last piece of evidence when you no longer need to argue because the evidence argues for itself. David looked at it. It was the communication summary, Briggs's account, the message thread, the date, and the words, "Our contract." 6 months before Patricia filed. "You didn't build contingency options," Andre said. "You built a plan. And you started building it before there was anything to respond to, which means you didn't react to a crisis." He held David's gaze without blinking. "You made one." The partnership dissolution was completed that afternoon. The fraud and breach of fiduciary duty clauses, the ones David had personally argued to strengthen during the founding negotiations, because he had said a partnership was only as good as the accountability built into it, held exactly as written. Diane presented the paperwork. David's attorney, reached by phone, advised him to sign. He signed. The room emptied slowly after that. The CFO left without making eye contact with anyone. The project managers filed out quietly. David left last of the people who had come in expecting something different, and he did not look at Andre when he went. Andre stood at the window after the room cleared. Leon was leaning against the wall near the door, jacket finally unbuttoned. Diane was at the table, reorganizing the document packets with the efficient calm of a woman who had already moved on to the next phase. Ruth sat at her end of the table a moment longer, looking at the room the way she looked at things she had thought about for a long time. Then she stood, straightened her jacket, and picked up her handbag. "I'm ready to go home," she said. Leon pushed off the wall. "Yes, ma'am." He looked at Andre once, a look that said everything and asked nothing, and then led Ruth out of the conference room. Diane gathered her portfolio, nodded at Andre, and followed. The room was empty. Andre stood at the head of the table and looked at it, the face-down packets, the empty seats, the single document still sitting where he had placed it in front of David's chair. The building outside the windows had filled up with its ordinary morning, people moving through lobbies, elevators opening and closing, the city doing what it always did, indifferent to everything that had just happened in this room on the 14th floor. He stood there for a few minutes. Then he turned off the light and left. Andre called on a Wednesday morning. Patricia picked up on the third ring. Her voice was careful, not cold, but measured in the way of someone who had spent several days recalibrating and had not yet landed anywhere solid. He told her there were things she needed to understand before everything was finalized. He told her it would not take long. He told her he was coming alone. She said yes. Leon pulled up to the Bethesda house at 2 in the afternoon and left the engine running. The lawn was still neat. The hedges along the front walk were still trimmed. From the outside, the house looked exactly like it always had, like the kind of home a successful man built for a life he believed in. Andre sat in the passenger seat for a moment. "You want me to come in?" Leon asked. "No." Leon nodded. He said nothing else. Andre got out and walked up the front path alone. Patricia answered the door in a cream blouse and dark slacks, her hair pulled back. She looked composed. She had worked at it. But the house behind her was quieter than it used to be, and the quiet had a different quality now. Not the quiet of a home at rest, but the quiet of a space that was still figuring out what it was. She led him to the living room. They sat across from each other. No attorneys, no portfolios, just two people in a room full of furniture they had chosen together, in a house that had once meant something to both of them. Andre set a thin folder on the coffee table between them. He did not open it yet. He spoke without preamble. He told her about the financial assessments David had prepared, how they had gutted the federal contract portfolio on paper, described long-term federal relationships as speculative, buried the renewal provisions, pulled the bonding capacity figures down by 30%. He explained what the goal was: suppress the company's value on paper so that Warren Spill could buy Andre's share for a fraction of what it was worth. Then let the real numbers resurface after the transaction closed. He told her about the shell entity. He said her name was in it. He said David had built her a quiet stake, not a partnership, not an equal share, but a position carefully designed to give her something without giving her enough to ask questions about the rest. Patricia's eyes did not move from his face, but the stillness in her expression was no longer composure. It was something else now. He told her about the call she made to Ruth. Something shifted. It moved across her face the way a shadow moves across a wall, fast and impossible to take back. "She answered every question you asked," Andre said. "She was warm. She was gracious. She gave you 45 minutes and not one useful thing." He paused. "She knew what you were doing within the first 10 minutes. She told me that herself. And when you hung up, she sat in her kitchen in Baltimore and decided not to call me, not to warn me, just to wait, because she knew I would find it." The room was quiet. Patricia looked at the folder on the table. Then she looked at him. The marriage was empty, Andre. Her voice was even, rehearsed in the way that things become when you have said them to yourself enough times that they start to feel like the whole truth. You were always working. I was always secondary. I spent 12 years in this house while you built something that had nothing to do with me. She paused. I deserved more than that. Andre listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not look away. When she finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, I don't disagree that the marriage needed more from me. I've thought about that every day since the filing. I've sat with it. He leaned forward slightly. But you didn't come to me with that. You didn't say the marriage was empty. You didn't ask for more. His voice did not rise. It stayed exactly where it had been, low and level and precise. You went to my partner. You spent 2 years building a plan to take what I built. That's not a woman trying to save her marriage. That's a woman who decided the marriage was worth more as a transaction than as a life. He opened the folder and slid the partnership dissolution documents across the table. David signed yesterday afternoon. His attorney advised it. He let her read the top page. The fraud and breach of fiduciary duty clauses were airtight. He argued to strengthen them himself when we founded the company. He paused. He has nothing left to stand behind. Patricia looked at the documents. Her eyes moved across the page slowly, taking in what the language meant, the full weight of what the plan had actually produced. He let her sit with it. Then he stood. He buttoned his jacket. He picked up the folder from the table and walked to the door. He did not look back. Outside, the afternoon was cool and gray. Leon was at the curb, engine running, both hands on the wheel. Andre got in and closed the door. Leon pulled away from the house, without a word. They drove 2 blocks in silence, past the neighbor's oak tree, past the stop sign at the corner, past the life Andre had built and walked away from. Then Leon said, You good? Andre looked out the window at the neighborhood moving past. I'm going to be, he said. Drive. The restaurant sat on the 14th floor of a building that looked out over Lagos at night, and the city was lit up in every direction. Towers and traffic, and the slow amber glow of 10 million lives happening all at once. Inside, the table was full and loud and warm, the kind of dinner that only happens when people have done something real together and know it. Andre sat near the center of it, a glass of water in front of him, listening to Kwame argue with the structural engineer from Abuja about load tolerances in high-humidity environments. Kwame was animated and precise, and almost always right, which made him excellent company, and occasionally exhausting. Andre liked him considerably. 14 months. The federal contract had moved into its second phase 6 weeks ago. The company's valuation had crossed $700 in the third quarter. An independent assessment, conservative by most analysts' standards, not a number anyone had manufactured. Whitfield Infrastructure Group was no longer a story about one man and one company. It was becoming something else, something that would outlast him if he built it correctly. And he intended to build it correctly. Diane was back in Washington. She had accepted the general counsel title with a handshake and no ceremony, which was exactly how she accepted everything. Leon had spent the last week in the field outside Abuja, reviewing site conditions for the preliminary survey phase, and Andre had received 3 voice messages from him that were efficient, specific, and mildly profane in the way Leon always became when a project was going well, and he did not want to admit how much he was enjoying it. The consequences for other people had settled into their final shapes. Andre was aware of them the way you are aware of the weather in a city you no longer live in. Present knowledge, no longer personal. David was on his 3rd attorney. The civil suit from Andre had moved through discovery, and into a phase David's legal team was visibly struggling to manage. Warren Spill's attorneys were a separate problem entirely. Patient, expensive, and motivated by the particular fury of a man who had been positioned as an unwitting participant in a fraud. David's investment accounts were gone. The side ventures, the equity stakes he had been quietly building using insights pulled from Whitfield Infrastructure's internal financials, were in play as additional breach. His name, which had opened doors for 2 decades, arrived in rooms before he did now and changed the temperature. He had hired and fired 3 attorneys in 5 months. The fourth was either very good or very desperate. Andre did not follow it closely enough to know which. Patricia was in the house on Elm Court. The mortgage was $1.4 million against a property in a market that had continued to soften. Howard Brandt was under bar investigation. Cooperative with Diane's requests, motivated by self-preservation, no longer available as any kind of resource. Renelle had grown quiet after Leon had a direct and unhurried conversation with her husband. The kind of conversation that did not raise its voice and did not need to. Patricia's circle was smaller now. The phone rang less. The life she had priced out in her head had resolved into something specific and manageable, and nowhere near what she had circled on that laptop. Briggs had called Andre's office once, asking about a path back to Whitfield's contractor roster. Andre's assistant had taken the message. Andre had not returned the call. Ruth Whitfield was still the sole legal owner of RMW Capital Partners, LLC. 3 months after the divorce was final, Andre had raised the subject of a transfer on a Sunday call from his hotel room. Ruth had been quiet for a moment, the kind of quiet she used when she was deciding whether a thing was worth addressing, and then said, "It's staying where it is until I decide otherwise. Don't ask me again." He had not asked again. Down the table, Amani was explaining something to one of the junior engineers from the Development Authority. Patient, clear, precise. During the afternoon session, she had corrected one of Andre's legal interpretations without hesitation and without softening it, and he had looked at her for a moment and said she was right, and she had nodded once and moved on. He had found himself watching her since then the way he watched a structure that had been built well, with the specific attention of a man who recognized quality and understood exactly what it took to produce it. He did not rush. He had learned, more than he ever wanted to, the cost of misreading a foundation. He had sat with that lesson in hotel rooms and on early morning drives and at his mother's kitchen table in Baltimore, and he understood it now in the way that only costs you something if you apply it. He would not make that mistake again, but he would not refuse to build. That was not who he was. It had never been who he was. Kwame refilled Andre's glass without being asked and resumed his argument with the engineer from Abuja, gesturing with his fork. Andre listened and said nothing, and watched the table around him. The noise and the warmth of it, the specific pleasure of a room full of people who had done the work and were sitting in the result. When the dinner began to wind down, he stepped outside onto the terrace. The city was below him in every direction. Lagos at night did not quiet. It shifted, rearranged itself, kept moving. He stood at the railing and let the air come in off the water, and thought about his mother. He had asked her once, on the Sunday drive to Baltimore, sometime after everything had settled, how she had done it, how she had sat across from Patricia for 11 years at dinners and holidays and family gatherings, knowing what she knew about the company structure, and never said a word. Ruth had been quiet for a moment. Then she had said, "Baby, I didn't need to say a word. I built you. I knew you'd figure it out." Andre looked out at the lights. He was not finished building. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.